Texas and Bama, yeah, we're going to have to talk about it. How about Arkansas and South Carolina? You know that's on the docket as well. Welcome into Up to the Second College Football Season 2, Episode 2. You guys don't need that information, but you do need this. We're presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. They want to remind you to have fun out there with Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'm David Nuño, and she is Kennedy Smith.
Thanks for having me on, David.
You're part of the show, girl.
Thanks for inviting me to help host, David. Feeling good after a week of college football under the belt. I'm looking really forward to seeing how LSU recovers after that loss to FSU in the upcoming weeks. Going to see how they bounce back. What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I think the most important thing I'm looking forward to is, are the Horns ready for SEC play? Look, it could be as early as next year. That could certainly be the case that they're in the SEC. Are they ready? They're going to get Alabama this weekend, so I'm certainly watching that. And, of course, all the other SEC storylines out there, and Ohio State, Notre Dame, everybody from last week, how they look this week here in the second week of college football, Kennedy.
Yeah, we shall see. So on the show today, we have Chris Doering from SEC Network, along with some insiders from Texas, Bama, South Carolina, and Kentucky. It's Up to the Second Football.
All right, our first guest here on Up to the Second College Football is a guy who can rock a muscle shirt. He can talk SEC football, talk about being a dad. It is Chris Doering, SEC Network's own, and, of course, a Florida Gator who had a very good weekend. What's going on, Chris? How are you, sir?
Hey, good to be on with you guys. Yeah, it was a surprisingly good weekend. Obviously, got to cover a lot of wins here in this conference, but my alma mater surprised me a little bit, man. I had been out to practice a number of times in the preseason and didn't see anything like I saw in terms of offensive output in any of those practices compared to what we saw Saturday night. So a pleasant surprise for me, and if not for LSU, man, would have been a perfect weekend for the conference.
Yeah, so I want to ask you about Anthony Richardson, because we knew he was an athlete, but this guy looked like he's been doing this for a while. Limited number of reps that he had last season, coming in and taking down a top 10 team. What did you think of that performance?
Obviously, it was amazing, man. And going back and watching the tape, I didn't get to watch it live because I was calling the South Carolina game at the same time. But watching the cut-ups, he looks like he plays at another speed, like everybody else is moving, half rate of what he's moving. So it's I guess the reason why probably in being at practice I wasn't impressed with the offense is because you can't simulate game reps in practice. You're not going to let your quarterback get hit, and the strength of Anthony Richardson is his elusiveness, his strength, his ability to extend plays, his ability to scramble when he's in trouble. So it clearly made sense after I saw what I saw, but I did not have any idea that Florida was going to be able to move the ball as efficiently as they did. And I want to give credit. Watching the cut-up, man, offensive line was better than what I thought they were going to be. The running backs ran hard in addition as a compliment to Anthony Richardson. So this is an offense that has a lot more upside than what I ever could have imagined, and I'm excited about what they can do against a challenging Kentucky team Saturday night.
I was going to say, what a tough start to your schedule. Utah, then Kentucky. Kentucky doesn't look great in their opener, but they take care of business. How tough of a matchup is this one?
Yeah, it's a tough month of September for Florida because in addition to those two teams, they end the month going to Knoxville against Tennessee, and everybody feeling really good about where the Vols are this season. So it was good to get a win in the bank with that schedule in front of you. But the reason, and going back in the postseason or preseason, I picked Kentucky to have a historically good season, but I picked them to win in this game against Florida. It was because where the schedule kind of laid out for the Gators, having to play against a physical Utah team on Saturday night, win or lose, it was going to be draining emotionally and physically, and then having to come back and play against an equally, if not more physical team in Kentucky, I thought posed a real challenging situation for the Gators. And so I wasn't impressed with Kentucky's offensive line play. I don't know how much better they can get in the matter of a week, but I do think Florida's going to have to find a way to refill the tank and get ready to go, make sure they have that same sort of energy that they bring as well as the Swamp brings.
All right, well, I've got to pivot to my question of the week, and I'm sure a lot of people are asking this too. Do you think that Texas has a chance of making this game against Bama at all interesting?
No, not at all. I mean, I think this is a similar type, maybe not to the extreme of what we saw Georgia do to Oregon, but I think we're talking about a mismatch right now. I mean, obviously there's some intriguing storylines with Steve Sarkisian taking on, his former coach there, Nick Saban. I just don't think they're quite ready for what Alabama's going to bring to the party on Saturday. It looked like Bryce Young found some young receivers to step up and fill the void of Mechie and Williams. Offensive line, at least for one night, looked better there. The defense was lights out, shutting out Utah State. So I think Quinn Ewers is in for a handful on Saturday between Dallas Turner and Will Anderson heating him up. So it's not going to be competitive, in my opinion.
All right, Chris, so A&M gets App State this weekend, a team that scored 40 points in the fourth quarter against North Carolina. I watched that game because I was getting ready. We were in that 3-hour rain delay for the Aggies and Sam Houston. Your thoughts on what Appalachian State can do potentially offensively and what they've been able to do over years is just really make these games so competitive?
It was hard to watch with my connection to North Carolina, particularly their defense. Gene Chizik, having been on the desk with us for the last 5 years, taking over the DC position, as you mentioned, gave up a historic 40 points in the fourth quarter, but somehow found a way to get a stop in that 2-point try that App had at the end of the game. App is always feisty. They're always playing with a chip on their shoulder. I think a lot of those guys feel like they were overlooked by some of the Power 5 conference teams and play extra hard. Good news is you don't have to go to App like North Carolina did, but I think it'll be a challenge. And going back and looking at some of the stuff that transpired on Saturday, Texas A&M is going to have to find a way to block better. I mean, that's the real surprising thing to me is that they weren't able to run the football against Sam Houston State very consistently. So finding a way to get back to what their bread and butter is, and that's running the football and being able to play great defense. I was impressed with the shutout. Obviously, it's a little inferior talent than they'll probably play later in the season, but you can only line up and play against the team on the other sideline. And quite frankly, that 3-hour rain delay, nothing worse as a player than getting warmed up and playing and going back in and waiting. I can imagine the toll that took on them, not only physically but the unknown and not understanding when you're going to have a chance to get back out there and play again can be challenging from the mental standpoint too.
Right. Speaking of that A&M offense, what did you make about Haynes King's first performance on the football field in around a year?
Yeah, full disclosure, I haven't had a chance to go back and watch the cut-ups yet. I saw some of it on TV as I was having to head to Columbia for the South Carolina call. But I do, it probably what you expect, right? I mean, a guy hadn't played in a year, trying to knock some of the rust off. I thought he made some good plays and at times left some out there on the field. But clearly I trust Jimbo Fisher. Nobody knows quarterback play as well as he does. And so I think he feels comfortable with the decision. And I imagine, there's going to be a considerable jump for the entire team, but specifically for he and the offense from week 1 to week 2, as everybody kind of talks about. The most improvement takes place from the first game to the second game usually.
Chris, the South Carolina-Arkansas game, I'm really intrigued by because South Carolina played, Georgia State really close, at least for a while. Then, they're able to get those special team touchdowns. And then Arkansas, I have a lot of respect for Cincinnati, but it's not the same Cincinnati team from last year. Desmond Ritter's gone. Some of their defense is gone. Yet that game came down to the wire as well. How good of a matchup is it this weekend?
Definitely questions still to be answered for both teams. And I had an up-close and personal look at South Carolina on Saturday night. The talk all offseason in the conference was Spencer Rattler, and Spencer Rattler was largely negated because the offensive line was so poor. Weren't able to run the ball like they could last year. Definitely didn't protect him very well. He got sacked multiple times and probably should have been sacked a few more times if not for his athleticism. But even some of the throws he completed, it was scrambling out, buying time, letting receivers uncover. So I really felt for Spencer not being able to take his steps, set his feet, and throw the football. The offensive line's got to be a lot better. I know a lot of the South Carolina players have come to the defense of the offensive line on social media this week so far, but all offseason we were told that these guys, all 5 of them coming back as starters, were going to be a lot better than last year. And at least in the first game of the season, I didn't see the improvement. Now, on the other side, we know how physical and well-disciplined Barry Odom's defenses are, and they're going to be a challenge for what South Carolina's offensive line is going to have to do on Saturday. I am still a little curious as to who else is going to step up. I assume, I don't know if we've seen an announcement yet, but Jalen Catalon going down with another shoulder injury clearly has everybody concerned there. I thought Bumper Poole was tremendous with his 13 tackles on Saturday, but who are some of the other guys that are going to step up, particularly on the defensive line and take over that physical mentality that last year's team had?
Chris, right now, do you think it's really Georgia, Alabama, and then everybody else?
Yeah, I thought it was Alabama, space, Georgia, space, everybody else. But I think with the performance that Georgia had on Saturday against Oregon. They're right there in my mind with Alabama. The defense was a question. Who were the guys that were going to step up and take over for all the production you lost last year, particularly 5 of those guys in the NFL draft? But it looked like they hadn't missed a beat. I mean, it was fast. It was aggressive. It was playing together in a very tight, kind of connected manner that impressed me. And then offensively, that was by far the best that I've seen. That offense look, the best I've seen Stetson Bennett look. They let him take the leash off a little bit and put the game in his hands. And I thought he was cool. I thought he was collected under pressure, and some of those scramble plays that he made really showed the athleticism that I think a lot of people don't necessarily give him credit for. So I put those 2 teams in the mix. I do think there's a bit of a space between the next tier, and everybody's kind of fighting for that spot. But I will say this, Kennedy, I'm impressed with the SEC East. I think we all know from top to bottom that the SEC West is the best division in college football from top to bottom. But in the East, we talked about who the next best team was going to be behind Georgia, and you saw Florida make a bid for that. Tennessee looked great. Hendon Hooker was tremendous on Thursday night. Kentucky escaped with a win over Miami of Ohio. Missouri got a win. Even Vanderbilt, has 2 more wins than LSU does at this point in the season. So it's a fun kind of discussion to have, even though I think the West is still better. I think the East is trying to narrow the gap a little bit.
All right, Chris, we talked to Anthony Richardson. A little bit about Stetson Bennett. There's some good quarterback play this past weekend. Who else caught your eye?
We'd be remiss not to talk about Will Rogers. And Will Rogers, to me, it was like a victim of Pac-12 syndrome, where you play late, they got delayed, nobody's really watching, but people didn't see him throw the football 49 times and complete 78% of them, including 5 touchdowns. The guy has just taken his play to another level, and I'm excited about the season for them. I think they're a little bit under the radar. Obviously, we talked about Stetson Bennett there, Anthony Richardson. I'm interested to see what Will Levis does this week against Florida. He also struggled not being protected for much of the game against Miami of Ohio, but still with his athleticism was able to be elusive and made some great throws in that one too. So I'm a big fan of his, and obviously we haven't even talked about Bryce Young, but he really looks like he's picking up where he left off last year too.
What did you make of Brian Kelly's debut against FSU?
I thought LSU was absolutely miserable. I mean, I was shocked at how bad they were. Their offensive line, clearly, we know why Jaden Daniels won that job. His athleticism was supposed to be one of the reasons why he was the favorite to win the job, but the deficiencies on the offensive line, their best play was a scramble play. Their second best play was a pass interference or personal foul call against Florida State. Other than that, they did next to nothing. So, I think that LSU's in trouble this year. I thought that they were a team that could exceed expectations, but after watching not only the deficiencies on the offensive line, the strength of the team was supposed to be the D-line. I thought they were largely a non-factor, and the injury to Mason Smith now makes that even more glaring. And then the undisciplined nature. I think that's the thing that surprised me the most. Brian Kelly, known for, I thought he was going to bring that team together. I thought they were going to look like they were playing well as a unit, but they made a ton of mistakes, red zone errors, penalties, special teams muffs. You had the coming off the sideline after a timeout, having to call a timeout. Like, they just looked like they were completely disjointed, and that was the thing that I think surprised me the most about their effort on Sunday night.
Chris, man, you're the best. Thank you so much. We'll do it again, all right?
Yeah, fun being with you guys. Look forward to checking back in a couple weeks.
At Academy Sports and Outdoors, bikes for the whole family are just a click away. Buy online at academy.com with our free in-store assembly. Your next set of wheels, plus helmets, pads, and water bottles will be waiting for you at our in-store pickup counter. Get to the fun faster with our in-store pickup and free assembly at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
So our big game of the week this week is obviously Texas versus Alabama, and we're going to get into it with both perspectives here on the show. We've got Tony Tsoukalas of Tide Illustrated, and we've got RaheelRamzanalipreview, one half of the world-famous No Layups crew, here on the show. What's up, guys?
Hey, how's it going?
What's up, man? Doing all right.
So, Tony, full disclosure, Raheel and I have done TV and radio together for the last 15 years. He's a Longhorn. I'm an Aggie. We make it work. It is what it is. So let's start things off with you, Tony. No issues in the opener, but I know that Nick Saban always has got something to nitpick on. What did he nitpick on? Was it Jahmyr Gibbs?
No, it was the consistency of the running game. If you look, Alabama's actually fourth in the nation, averaging like 8.7 yards a carry, but that's kind of deceiving. I mean, that doesn't really speak. It's not indicative necessarily of the run blocking that they had. I mean, 100 of those yards came on scrambles by Bryce Young on passing plays. Then you take out a big run by Jahmyr Gibbs and another big run by Jamarian Miller, and all of a sudden you're averaging like on a consistent basis around 3.8 yards a carry. Now, that's not the way football is played. You can't just hypothetically subtract things, but I think what Nick Saban's saying is that he wants it to be more consistency and not more feast and famine when it comes to getting big runs. And so I think that's something that they'll be focusing on heading into this week 2 game against Texas, is just getting more consistent. I mean, more 5, 6, 7 yard runs instead of, having a big run and then getting stuffed and then having another big run.
Raheel, what about Quinn Ewers? I saw obviously he struggled initially, but give us an assessment of the entire game.
Yeah, the deep ball, what everyone was excited to watch with Quinn is that arm action, how deep he can throw, how accurate he can be. That never got going. His intermediate game was good, and, he was fine, but this was his first game in, 3 years now almost, right, since high school. So it was a good game to get going, and it was nice to see him make some adjustments in the second half and get some big plays. But most of those big plays were just getting the ball to the right player and letting those explosive receivers and running backs take care of the rest. And that's going to be the big thing coming up this week is, can Quinn make big plays and not just give it to the players and let them make plays?
Tony, when it comes to Nick Saban and his relationships with assistant coaches, it always becomes its own storyline. But what about when it comes to Sark? What kind of relationship do they have, and is it being talked about there?
Yeah, they have a lot of respect for each other, and I've heard Sark saying that Saban saved his career, and I think Saban would tell you that Sark's probably one of the best assistants he's ever had in his whole tenure at Alabama. When you look at that offense that Sark put together, especially the 2020 offense. Now, he had a lot of tools to work with, but I mean, when you have an offense that has 3 Heisman top 5 vote getters, that's pretty crazy. So I think Steve Sarkisian is one of the best offensive minds in the game, and I think Nick Saban has a ton of respect for him. And you can't really fault someone for taking the job at Texas. It's one of the biggest jobs in America. So I think that there's just a respect both ways for those coaches.
Raheel, both teams scored 50-plus points. Oh, you look like you're going to say something. Go ahead. What's the joke?
I was going to say something. I know Alabama's got to be missing him just a little bit, right? Like, because we've gotten the Bill O'Brien treatment when being in Houston and watching him with the Texans, and it's so frustrating. And there were times last year you're watching that offense, you go, "Oh, Bill O'Brien strikes again."
I mean, Bill O'Brien had his moments. Well, let's not forget that he did, produce the first Heisman Trophy quarterback in school history. And Alabama didn't lose last year because of their offense necessarily. I mean, they had injuries, and then they just ran up against a really great Georgia defense in that championship game. And that Georgia team was great. But Bill O'Brien had his moments where it was a little bit frustrating. But I don't necessarily think he's as bad as what he gets made out to be. Look, he's not going to be making any trades for Alabama. And I think that's really when you criticize Bill O'Brien, it's maybe his GM work that really needs work. I don't necessarily think he's the worst coach and not the worst offensive coach. Now, if Alabama was trading in the transfer portal or something, yeah, I think maybe it's time to pick someone else to do that. But I think that I think Sarkisian's a better offensive mind, but I do think that Bill O'Brien's he's fine, and I think it's a little bit overblown, some of the criticism he gets.
Well, I'm just going to tell you from an A&M perspective, I love when he calls the plays inside the 5-yard line. To me, he can do that.
That was the game, I think, that really started it, though. Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look back at that A&M game, a lot of the critiques that Bill O'Brien gets are why wasn't he just running the ball, or yeah, so I maybe that's been ironed out. Maybe it hasn't, but you really can't look at last year and be too hard on him. I mean, because Alabama had a great offense last year.
All right, Raheel, so 50-plus points from Texas and Alabama. If you are a University of Texas fan, is that what you're thinking about? Hey, the only way we win this game is in a shootout?
Yeah, that's it, because I don't know about the defense just yet. They looked a little bit faster going side to side, and there was a little bit better of a rush, something that Texas lacked major last year. I mean, it was just bad last year. But again, this is a different beast. This is an offense that is going to be fantastic throughout the entire year. You get a chance to match up against them. I don't know what kind of stops they're going to get. I don't know what they're going to do on special teams. The only hope is you look at your two best players on the team, and that's on the offensive side with Bijan Robinson and Xavier Worthy. And you just hope that some of those guys can make some big plays and the offense can go punch for punch like they did against LSU, because I don't know if this defense can stop Alabama's offense.
Tony, let's talk about the Alabama offensive line. So that's always been the big storyline, like one of the weaknesses potentially. Now, Texas does not, or at least did not, have a really good defense in 2021, but is it still a good barometer to see how the offensive line is doing? Because they do have athletes regardless.
Definitely. And I think, like I said, with the running game, Texas, obviously they did better against stopping the run against ULM, but this will be a different beast. Texas struggled at stopping the run last year. So, Alabama, you'd want to see them establish that consistency this week against a better opponent than Utah State. So I mean, I think this is a good test in terms of talent. What Texas is like a 20-point underdog. That's a lot for being a home dog. But that being said, even with most people predicting Alabama, I think this is a really talented Texas team. Maybe not as deep, but has the talent, and it should allow Alabama to test some things. I mean, you look at some of the areas that Alabama needs to test. The offensive line's one of them. Cornerbacks are another one. I think Texas will be able to kind of like challenge them in those areas, and maybe you'll see a truer, test of what Alabama has.
Raheel, let's talk about from the Texas defensive perspective. I don't think Alabama is going to be a fair assessment of their defense. So at what point do we know, all right, the defense has taken steps in the right direction?
I think you look at that OU game. That's going to be a good measuring stick. You've got UTSA coming up, which put up a lot of points against the University of Houston. There's a lot of potential matchups where you look at this defense and go, okay, they look better, right? And they're actually producing, and not just looking, but actually producing on the stats side. Because as I mentioned, you just watching every single game, seeing this defense last year, the couple, even 2 years ago, they looked slow, and now they looked much faster. But again, it's ULM, right? So it's a different comparison. So I think by that OU game, you'll have a pretty good snapshot of, is this a good defense or is this a lot of the same from last year?
And Raheel, we'll keep it with you. What will be considered a successful season? Because you look at that schedule, and I think there's a lot of things you think about the Big 12, like, man, I don't know, Baylor should be okay. Oklahoma, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of I don't knows, but I know Texas fans do jump off the ledge easily. So is it 8 wins considered successful after the 5 wins last year? Is it 9? If they get destroyed by Bama, what's the shakeout there?
I'm just going to make the joke first before anybody else does. Beating Kansas would be a good start. I'll just take, because I know how everyone's going to be, and I know how you guys are going to say. So look, I'm going to make the Kansas joke, but for me, it's going to be, look, you got to beat OU in this Alabama game. This is a good measuring stick of where you are in terms of where your talent is for the potential SEC move, maybe as early as next year. So like looking at that, getting to the Big 12 championship game, I think that's a legit goal. Like you can get to the Big 12 championship game and then see what happens, but that's going to be a pretty good measuring stick based on all the weapons that you have and all the lack of weapons that other schools have right now in the Big 12.
Tony, I would say for Alabama, I mean, they clearly look like one of the best teams again in the country. It's like Georgia, Alabama, and everybody else. That being said, last year, I forget the number. I think it was 6 of 8 games came down to the last few minutes for Alabama. There was at least a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. You can remind me of the stat, but there were a lot of close games. The Arkansas game, the Florida game, the A&M game. There were a lot of close games in the fourth quarter. What has to be different this year?
When you look at this Alabama team, I think that just the mentality around this team has to be better. Last year, there was a lot of just distractions off the field. And injuries also hurt Alabama last year too. But I think the biggest thing that kind of derailed Alabama was some of the distractions, and so some of the younger players that had the talent to step up and maybe fill in some of those spots for the injuries. They weren't ready because they were too, in their heads about not playing early and stuff like that. So those breaks are going to happen to every team. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have adversity that every top team is going to have to deal with that. So there are no excuses for Alabama, but they have a deep enough roster that should be able to handle that if their head's right, if their players are, I hate to say it because it's so cliche, but buying into this Alabama process and all that jazz. If that goes right, you're looking at this team. There's not many teams that can match them on talent with both sides of the ball. I think this defense that Alabama has could be the best defense Nick Saban's ever put together. You look at the pass rushers. If they can, establish the secondary, it's going to be lethal, because if you got Will Anderson and Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell, I mean, that's three of the top, I think with Will Anderson and Dallas Turner, you got two of the top 5 pass rushers in the nation. And I think maybe Braswell could even be a sneaky top 10 guy. I mean, I'm not just trying to be a homer here with those assessments. I really think that these guys are some of the best pass rushers, and to have all 3 of them on the same team is going to be absolutely scary. And so I think, Alabama has a lot of potential to live up to, but it certainly has the talent to be a special team this year.
Looks like 5 games
I hate
last
hearing
year.
that. I hate hearing that.
I did some research. By research, I looked on Google. It looks like 5 games last year came down to 1 score. The Florida game, obviously, that was a nail biter. The A&M game that A&M ended up winning. Did I say that already? You've got the LSU game. You've got the Auburn game. 4. So 4 of those games came down to the final score. LSU, Auburn, A&M, and the Florida game. So a lot of close games. Raheel, what are the keys for Texas this weekend?
Well, I guess just show up, because based on what Tony just said, this could be one of the best defenses Nick has ever put together. So, I mean, I guess keep it within the number, but you look back at that Miami game last year, right? They just destroyed them. So you go, ooh, another comp I was looking at is like, who's better right now in terms of talent, right? Last year's Tennessee team or this year's Texas team? Just overall SEC talent, right? Like matching up against Alabama, because Alabama destroyed Tennessee. So I know it's 2 different things. And look, you have a young quarterback still trying to find his way on the college, on the college stage right now with Quinn. So to me, the keys to the game is just, get that offense going, get the ball into the hands of Bijan, Xavier, any of the other receivers that are ready to make some plays, and then come up with some key stops, right? Come up with something that can keep it close and put some pressure on Alabama, because obviously they're the best team in the country. If you can just put some pressure on them and take into the 4th, I mean, if a third-string quarterback can pull off the upset last year, then why can't Texas and Quinn? So
that was a shot. Yeah. That was a shot at Zach Calzada. That was a shot.
Where is Zach these days?
He's 3rd string at Auburn.
That's what I thought.
Okay, Tony.
You know what? One of the things I'll bring up for Texas, if they're going to beat Alabama, is you really do look at Bijan Robinson, and you'll be able to see, Texas A&M's exploited this at times. Alabama has trouble guarding versatile or multi-dimensional running backs, guys that can catch out of the backfield. That they've struggled at picking those guys up, those and tight ends. So, I mean, if Texas can, get Bijan going in the passing game, maybe you could, rip off a few, 20, 30-yard gains where he's just left open somehow. And, he's an athlete. So, you get him the ball in those kind of situations. And that could be a big play, especially for a guy like Ewers, who's going to need to have some of those checkdowns, some of those safer passes to get going, get his confidence going. That's one way that I think that Texas probably has the best shot at maybe causing some damage at Alabama is getting Bijan up against the linebacker and seeing if he can beat him.
Tony and Raheel, we appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, man. Good luck, Tony.
Yeah. See you down there.
So we heard the Florida perspective there from Chris Doering just a little bit ago. Now we're going to turn to the Kentucky perspective as we get our insider on, Nick Roush from KSR. Nick, welcome back to the show, man. It's been a minute. How you been?
Appreciate being back on. Excited football's back, and Kentucky kind of eased their way in with a little action, but it gets real fast down in Gainesville this weekend.
Nick, let's. I want to talk about this game because I thought of it as, it'll be interesting to go to the Swamp. But before the Utah game, I was like, that should be a victory for Kentucky. Now I'm like, I don't know, man. That Florida team looks salty. Maybe it's because the Pac-12 and you shouldn't expect much from them. But this game's gotten a little bit harder than I think I would have thought a couple weeks ago.
Well, especially when you look at the way that Florida played. Like, we knew Anthony Richardson was going to be a stud, right? He's a superstar waiting to happen. No idea what Dan Mullen was thinking. But what was surprising is just how physical they play. And I know that it is a little bit different in the Pac-12, but Kyle Whittingham, he plays kind of that SEC light football where it's very physical, very smash mouth. And Florida took it to the chin and they delivered some blows back. And on the other side of Kentucky, Kentucky had, I think, if you take away the sack yardage, only 75 yards rushing without Chris Rodriguez, with a brand new offensive line where they're breaking in, filling 3 holes that left to the NFL last year. You didn't see that physical play that you had we've grown accustomed to in the Mark Stoops era. And that was something that I thought was a given. So in a way, it certainly has changed the equation when dissecting this game. Now, maybe Chris Rodriguez does come back. There's still some It sounds like he's not going to play, but there might be a chance. So that the math in all of this, David, is really tough because of the way that Kentucky played in week one. It's just unlike anything we're used to seeing from the Wildcats.
Nick, that's the hard part to understand because at least from the press conferences I've seen, it's like it's the TBD when it comes to Rodriguez's return. So why wouldn't he play? And kind of remind the audience of why he's in trouble and others have been in trouble as well, I should say.
Well, and Rodriguez, I mean, he could have woke up and played all 12 games. He stayed healthy. He was going to be Kentucky's all-time leading rusher. Graduation night, he parties too hard. He gets arrested for a DUI. This isn't what he probably would have sat out a game for that DUI regardless. This is something else, something undisclosed that nobody will talk about that is pretty clear. Mark Stoops, he can't say what it is, and he's made it clear it's out of his hands. The team elected him as a captain. They also elected Jordan Wright a captain, a starting outside linebacker that's in his, I want to say, sixth season, super senior over there. They would be playing if Stoops had his choice, but it's up the chain of command, and it might even be above athletic director Mitch Barnhart. We don't know who. They won't point anybody out. And from my understanding, Chris Rodriguez doesn't know when he's going to be back. Mark Stoops has no idea when he's going to be back. Some administrator, some suit up there just won't make up their mind, and it's left a bunch of people in limbo, especially, going into one of the biggest games of the year.
Help me understand why the game against Miami, Ohio was so close at the half. And I do understand the issues with the running game, but it had to be more than that, right?
Well, and some of it is because you don't have Chris Rodriguez as we're in the red zone. Just give it to this guy. He's going to smash his head through a brick wall and get in the end zone. Kentucky had 4 red zone trips. One of them ended in a field goal, but it was into half. They were, they ran out of time, if you will, but Kentucky dropped a touchdown pass in one instance. And then in another, they went for it in 4th and short. And instead of having Chris Rodriguez to give the rock to, they try to throw it into the end zone. Pass gets picked off. That's really the biggest glaring difference I see in Kentucky and Florida right now is Anthony Richardson is going to be a monster down there. Like trying to stop that guy in the red zone. I don't know if anybody can do that. Kentucky, their inefficiencies really showed up in the red zone. They were able to create explosive plays in the open field. They got a kickoff return touchdown from former top 100 true freshman and Barryon Brown. There's a lot of talent at wide receiver, but they don't have that physicality in the red zone that you need to get those tough, hard to gain yards.
Let's go back to that talent in the wide receiver room too, because it looked like Will Levis was linking up with Robinson quite a bit, and that was a nice sign.
Oh, it certainly was. And Tavion Robinson, there's so many high-profile transfers nowadays that it's easy to kind of gloss over this one, especially when at Virginia Tech, that offense was haphazard. I mean, look what Hendon Hooker did just leaving after 1 year. Like that. They were hapless. In one half of football, he set his career high for receiving yards. I mean, it was that quick. He isn't Wan'Dale Robinson, and he even wants to make that clear. Even though they share the same name, they're single-digit slot receivers. The slot really does excel in this offense, getting open across the middle of the field. The first play, he broke one for 40-some-odd yards. There wasn't anybody by him. Levis had all the time in the world. They really schemed it up well. But he is elusive once he gets the ball in his hands. He's the kind of mature, experienced one in the room. But I mentioned Brown off the top. He had 50 yards receiving. He brings the speed, right? You could see him having a push pass that he takes for 40 yards or something like that. And Dane Key is kind of the bigger target. He's from Lexington. His dad went to UK. Huge recruiting signee, had 4 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown. So Kentucky's really flipped the roster by recruiting and really upgrading the talent in the wide receiver room. We saw a 60-40 pass run discrepancy, where in the past that had been the opposite. You've got your quarterback in Will Levis. You've got your better receivers. You're going to see the Wildcats throw the ball around a lot more this fall.
Talking to Nick Roush here on Up to the Second College Football. Last thing for you, what are the keys for Kentucky to go to the Swamp and beat a Florida team that is going to be better than what most people expected?
Well, really, they got to stop the run. And they looked apart against Miami, but that's, it's against Miami. It's a whole different ball game. J.J. Weaver is a guy you need to circle, number 13 for the UK defense. 2 years ago, he was getting his first start, former blue chip recruit, was playing well against Kyle Pitts. Best game of his career, blows his ACL out. He comes back the next year. I believe his father was murdered that year. I mean, had about as tough as a year as you possibly can. Came back, second game of the season last year. He picks off a pass against Florida. He's the kind of game-changing edge that can make those plays. In the first game last week, he had a strip sack. UK didn't recover the fumble, but he also got a deflection, blocked a punt. He's Josh Allen White. Like, he can make plays on a defense like that. You need to have game wreckers. Kentucky's defense, I think, is getting back to where they want it to be, but you got to have those playmakers. If Kentucky can stop the run, mitigate those big plays, and get a couple big plays from J.J. Weaver, this defense can do enough to put themselves in position to win against the Gators.
That is Nick Roush from KSR. Nick, thank you so much, man. We'll do it again.
Appreciate you, David.
Thank you, man.
Need a new grill? Academy Sports and Outdoors is the destination for your outdoor cooking needs. With our free in-store assembly and pre-assembled grills and smokers, buy online at academy.com and pick up in-store. So keep those grilling plans at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
Up next, we've got a preview of Arkansas versus South Carolina. The Gamecocks got their first win of the season this weekend against Georgia State, but not without effort. They're definitely going to have to step up their game this weekend, going up against number 19 Arkansas, who beat Cincinnati on Saturday. Now, to talk more about this matchup, I've got here with me Keith Allsep. He is the host of the Locked on the Gamecocks podcast. How are you doing?
Hey, Kennedy, doing great. How about you? I hope you had a great Labor Day weekend.
You know, I was in here working. It is football season, no days off. So I just wanted
That's true.
Yeah, I wanted to get started talking about last weekend's matchup. So first game of the season under the belt. What were your biggest takeaways from South Carolina's first game against Georgia State?
Well, Kennedy, I thought South Carolina won with complimentary football. I thought they played excellent defense, particularly after Georgia State drove down the field on the opening drive. South Carolina's defense adjusted nicely, and then they responded to some adversity in the third quarter. Spencer Rattler threw a ball that probably should have been caught, but it went through the receiver's hands. Georgia State scores a touchdown, and all of a sudden they go up 14-12, and South Carolina marched right down the field on their best drive of the game to retake the lead and really never looked back. And then they blocked 2 punts for touchdowns, something that had not been done since 2000 when Lou Holtz was the coach of the Gamecocks. So, you know, I definitely think the offense has to improve, but I liked what I saw from the defense. Georgia State was the number 8 rushing team in all of college football last year. They returned, I believe, 10 starters on offense, and they give South Carolina kind of a look at what you'll see against Arkansas, but their quarterback, who was their third leading rusher, 6'4", 195, but he's not KJ Jefferson, who's 6'3", 245. And so it's certainly going to be a step up for South Carolina this week, no doubt about it.
So touching on the offense, Spencer Rattler, it was his debut with the Gamecocks. What were your thoughts on his first game?
Well, I thought he made some great scramble plays, but quite frankly, his offensive line didn't give him time to throw the football. And then I thought he probably made 2 or 3 really poor decisions throwing the football. Once on a deep shot into double coverage. Couldn't really blame the first interception on him, but they had 3rd and short, and he could have ran for the first down. It was a rollout. Or he could have thrown the underneath wide receiver, and he threw it right into coverage where it was intercepted. So I thought there was some good and some bad with Spencer Rattler. But I just did not think South Carolina was able to give Spencer Rattler time in the pocket. He was under duress most of the night.
So Arkansas is going to have a pretty tough defense for him. What do you think specifically he needs to be focusing on looking up to this matchup?
Well, I think the big thing is word out of Fayetteville this morning is 2 starters in their secondary and 1 Jalen Catalon, their All-American safety, and starting nickel Miles Slusher could be out for this game. I think Cincinnati took advantage of Arkansas in the passing game, but they had their running game going. Luke Fickell runs a tough program up there. They had the run game going. They hit a play action over the top for a deep ball for a touchdown. I think number one, South Carolina has to do a much better job of establishing the run against Arkansas. And then I think they've got to take some shots and get some big plays against a secondary that could be vulnerable minus 2 starters this weekend.
Spencer had 2 interceptions in the last game. Was that just a part of the shaking the rust off, or is that something we should be concerned about going ahead?
Well, like I said, the first one, it went right through the receiver's hands. I don't really put that on him, but it was his first game in a brand new system. He was under duress most of the night. And, you know, the old coaching adage, you make the most improvement from week 1 to week 2. And I think for South Carolina fans and for South Carolina's coaching staff, they have to hope that that old adage is true on Saturday, because it's going to take a lot of offensive improvement to go to Fayetteville and beat Arkansas.
I think the 2 real shining stars of that game was the defense and specifically the special teams. Was that kind of a surprise to you how well they did?
It really was not. I mean, we knew Georgia State would run the football. After the first drive, you know, South Carolina held them at bay until basically the game was over. They picked up a couple of big chunk plays. South Carolina is much more athletic at linebacker, which was a big issue last year. They return a lot of players up front. They're pretty deep there. On defense, probably the biggest surprise was the play of 2 true freshmen as the backup safeties, one of whom, Nick Emmanwori, was pressed into early duty due to an injury to R.J. Roderick. He had the big stop on 4th down. He had several other tackles and then a pass breakup as well. And so that was a bright spot. And, you know, Pete Limbo may be the best special teams coach in the country. Shane Beamer, you know, Beamer ball was built on special teams. And, you know, you had a fake field goal, you had 2 punt blocks for touchdown, and you had a 79-yard punt. And additionally, you had a first-time field goal kicker. His first 2 career field goal attempts were 53 and 51 yards, and he split the uprights both times. So, but they did snap the ball over the holder's head on the first extra point, almost all the way back to midfield. So a lot to clean up for South Carolina after week 1, for sure.
Yeah, that stat lines from the special teams was really a trip when you're reading it. So what are your thoughts now, first game with Coach Shane Beamer?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, this is his second year. He's a lot more comfortable in his skin. He returned most all of his coaching staff. But it's going to be a big test. This team did not perform well in true road games last year. Certainly, most of your listeners will remember just how poorly it went in College Station. The same was true of in Neyland Stadium. The game was over 10 minutes in. And so this is a big test for South Carolina. Can they show improvement on the road? They have better players. They have more experienced players than they had last year. You know, can they make a better showing on the road, or could they even break through with a big road win? I mean, I think that is what is on the mind of most South Carolina fans this week.
Now, you're there in Columbia. Can you give me a gauge of what the fan base is feeling right now with Coach Shane Beamer?
Well, I think this fan base is 100% behind Shane Beamer. You had a sellout crowd for a non-conference game, which that's pretty much an anomaly these days, right, Kennedy? Because every game is on television now. I mean, the Gamecock walk, where they walk from the practice facility to the stadium, I mean, it was a sea of garnet. There must have been over 20,000 fans out there for that. It was incredible. You know, it was an incredible atmosphere. the 2001, they've made a lot of improvements to the stadium with LED lights. That first sandstorm was amazing. And I mean, it was a great home environment. And after, I think the over-under last year was 3 wins by the Wise Guys for South Carolina. Obviously, they won 6. They got to a bowl game. They upset North Carolina. And, then Spencer Rattler and Austin Stogner announced they're coming. You sign a top 20 recruiting class. You fill a number of needs in the transfer portal. And this was a much anticipated second season. And I think South Carolina fans are expecting improvement. And that is to, hey, go on the road. Yes, you're playing a top 25 team. Be competitive. Get the game into the fourth quarter and give yourself a chance to win. Then you jump out of the frying pan into the pot next week. You play Georgia, who, quite frankly, look like the best team in the country, even with losing all those guys to the NFL. So the next 2 weeks are, going to be a big challenge for Shane Beamer in year 2 of his program.
A challenge indeed. So what do you think he needs to do to make sure that the Gamecocks can rise to the occasion?
Well, I think it all starts up front with the offensive line, Kennedy. They have got to show improved play. I think Marcus Satterfield, as an old coach, I could tell you, when you can't run the football and you can't get your perimeter game going, it's just hard to find a rhythm as a play caller. I think they need to simplify what they're doing. I think Jaheim Bell needs to be more involved in the passing game. And they've got to do something for their play caller to be able to get into a rhythm and call plays, because when you can't run the football and you can't establish a short passing game, you don't really know what to go to on your play sheet at that point.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us, Keith. That was Keith Allsep with Locked On the Gamecocks podcast.
And that'll do it for Up to the Second College Football. We'll see you guys for week 3.